Let's talk about the governor's bonding bill.
I think just to frame a little bit of context before I talk about that $30 million, the total bonding recommendation from the governor for the Minnesota DNR is at $196 million. And I think it's really important to remember all of the really exciting opportunities and really crucial work that entire bonding bill represents to ensure that the DNR can serve the public and to ensure that the public can enjoy all of the public lands that we manage. We manage about 5.6 million acres of public lands. We are responsible for 2,800 buildings, many of which serve the public on those public lands. And each of those buildings has many components. So in total, the bonding bill helps us ensure that those spaces are available to the public. I think one of the really exciting things that Rob mentioned is $30 million of that total is pegged for the acquisition and betterment of lands. So the acquisition piece of that is pegged at $17 million, and that's available for acquisition of forestry lands, which often serve as recreation lands for the public. It can be used for state park in holdings, but also for WMAs, and specifically we're looking at areas that are identified in the pheasant action plan, those areas that are going to help us create habitat in the pheasant range. And so we're really excited about that. We think that's a piece we know that the public supports. It's been some time since we've had dollars for acquisition in a governor's bonding recommendation, and so appreciate Governor Walz giving a nod to that, and we know that you all will join us in supporting that. The other piece of the $30 million is for the betterment of public lands, and that's to ensure we have money to do reforestation, to take care of things like hatchery ponds on public lands as well. And so that also is equally important to that acquisition piece.
Yeah, I just a quick follow-up. Is it just me, or it's been a while since we've had WMA dollars in a bonding bill? Is that right?
Yeah, it has been a number of years. So this is, a significant thing to have those restored in a governor's bonding bill. And again, so it'll be important to make sure people know that's in there, to keep pitching it. I did have the opportunity to present the bill in front of the House Capital Investment Committee earlier this week, and made sure they knew that was an important component of the bill.
Good.
I think also to that, with our legacy amendment, the idea of the legacy amendment was not that it was going to supplant the funds that we were already spending on taking care of our public land. So I think it's important to reestablish the spending that would happen anyway, without thinking that because we're doing the legacy amendment, it means we can have it take a back seat and just wait for the legacy dollars to pay for it.
How does local government fit in with land protection efforts? In your county, there have been many WMA and WPA acquisitions. Can you give your local perspective of public lands and what they mean to the people and health of your county?
Before this panel, Aaron and I had talked a little bit, and I believe the number is about 3,500 in Clay County for the public lands that have been acquired. And from the county commissioner's perspective, as long as we have township official buy-in and local neighbor buy-in at the beginning process, they kind of are able to help shape what the plan would be and any concerns brought up. We feel that it's really a benefit for our county, specifically with PILT allocated dollars to help offset the tax revenue loss that would happen. Oftentimes those can be equal or better for that. And so, from the county, it's kind of an economic boost, if you will, for some of these rural cities to have hunters go hunt for the day, stop at the Barnesville Cafe and eat, fill up their gas tanks. It's kind of an economic boost. And from what we're hearing, as long as they're involved in the decision process, we're okay with the transfer.
From a Pheasants Forever perspective, that's lockstep with our model and our point of view. We want to work with the local government where we can and try to express to them why we're doing projects, the benefits, the science, and certainly the economic value of our projects. So we're happy to continue to work with local government.
Speak to how the legacy amendment affects public lands expansion and management in Minnesota. Do you feel like public lands are a priority for the Lessard-Samms Outdoor Heritage Council?
Absolutely. I think for a lot of us on the council, we use public lands, so we know firsthand how important it is. Certainly on the council, we see the benefit of that. I think the piece that we sometimes forget is that really the council's job is to make good recommendations to the legislature, but the legislature, we're the ones that have to make it reality and actually make sure those funds get allocated. And I think that's where we hear some of the anti-public land, no net gain kinds of arguments. We had the first hearing for the 2020 for 2021 allocations yesterday or Thursday, and we had a lot of pushback. When will this ever be enough for you? Kind of not listening, I think, to what actual counties have to say about the benefit that we see statewide from public lands.
Rob, can I just add to that? Because I think the role that the council plays in the sort of intermediary between the agencies and organizations who are proposing public lands projects and other projects and the legislature, that council plays a really important role to have an entity that is looking really carefully at each of the projects, making sure it merits the investment of those public funds, making sure that it's responsive to the needs and wants of the public. I want to underscore the role that I think the council plays in that because it's important.
Next question to Scott Gloop. Scott, beyond pheasants or other wildlife habitat, what are some other benefits of public lands that the general public takes for granted sometimes? Do you have any estimate of some of the economic impact of WPAs where you are and in some of the counties where you're working? Does talking about some of those other benefits of public land, does it get more traction with county commissioners, township officers, and just the general public than maybe talking about, well, we're going to raise more pheasants here?
We focus a lot on the other benefits. We didn't used to do this. We always used to focus on the wildlife aspect. There's a multitude of ways people enjoy going out and enjoying these public lands. But a lot of the other benefits that aren't discussed enough or recognized enough include things like groundwater and surface water improvement, quality improvement in groundwater recharge and soil erosion control and carbon sequestration and pollinator services. There's a whole bunch of other type of ecosystem benefits that are occurring out there that we don't know enough about to put dollar signs on, but we don't talk about enough, and those are becoming more and more important all the time. So those are some of the things that I focus on. Just to give you an idea of the economic impact, I'm going to have to refer to some numbers I have here. So a few years back, the Fish and Wildlife Service did a study called Banking on Nature, and we had top economists and universities involved in this, and we went out and took a look at what the visitation, so those people that are coming to our lands to enjoy them, what kind of local economic impact that has. So I've looked at those numbers and I tried to extrapolate best I could, and I picked the county I happen to live in, Candioi County. So for last fall, I'll share these numbers with you. We had about 20,000 visits on just the WPAs in Candioi County. I'm not talking about WMAs in Sibley State Park and all the other DNR stuff. Just the WPAs in Candioi County would have been about 20,000 visits. 95% of that was hunters. So the bulk of it was hunters in those cases. The final economic demand of that, using 2011 numbers, so I think it would even be higher than this, was $1.3 million to the county. It supported about 11 jobs. It created $354,000 in employment income and about $165,000 in total tax revenue for the county. That doesn't include some of the other numbers that we can put, economic numbers we can put on. That's just for visitations alone. I think if we started looking at the flood control and how that minimizes damage downstream and the water quality benefits for the lakes that have 200 homes around them, and the property tax issues associated that with the county, as property values decline with poor water quality, so do tax revenues. The groundwater recharge, pollinator services. If we started and knew all those numbers and added them up, I think it would be, frankly, kind of mind-blowing. Now, in terms of talking about county commissioners, I've been doing this for about 30 years now in 3 different states, buying land, the Dakotas and Minnesota. And honestly, going in and talking to some county commissioners or township board about how many ducks this WPA is going to raise, you don't get any traction here. Generally speaking, those groups are interested in dollars. Whatever kind of dollars there are. And a lot of our counties now are starting to struggle with water quality issues, flooding issues, and those kind of things. People are speaking up more and more about their concerns about that. So if we can go in there and we do that, we share some of those numbers about how that particular acquisition may benefit, it gains a lot more traction. Does that cover your...
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah, quickly.
From the county's perspective too, we're in constant meetings with soil and water conservation districts and watershed managements. The buffer bill signed into law by the governor, a lot of it has to do with soil health, and you're right, if we can kind of tag team and get multiple benefits out of these projects, besides the dollars and the public's enjoyment, I think it's important as well.
What are the strategic priorities for protecting public land within the pheasant range? We've got a state pheasant plan. Howard Vincent this morning at the live member breakfast talked about, some pretty huge goals, not across the whole pheasant range, not just Minnesota, but, what are these strategic priorities for improving pheasant habitat in your view?
We talked a lot about multiple benefits here in the last question, and, those are the kinds of priorities we're looking for is, first and foremost, we want to put grass back on the landscape. We need to find a way to, make up for some of the losses we've seen over the last decade in grassland habitat. And we know that when we put grass back on the landscape, the birds respond. So that's our first and foremost, but we're also looking to do things like Scott talked about, and restore water that it's going to be helping water quality and clean water. We're trying to do things like help protect threatened and endangered species, rare species, native prairie, remnant native prairie. There's less than 1% of remnant native prairie left. And if we have an opportunity to protect that, we're certainly going to do that. And I should mention one other thing. When we're buying land and adding grass, often we're looking at marginal farmland. And I can't tell you how many landowners that are working with Pheasants Forever or any organization to protect their land have said, this part of my farm, I never should have plowed it. I've made a mistake. I've never had good farm. It's never produced well. It's costing me money. And it should be in grass or in habitat. And they really like that legacy part of that, part of the protection. And so how it fits into Pheasant Action Plan, it fits into all kinds of plans. You're talking about the Minnesota Prairie Plan, the Pheasant Action Plan, you're talking about the State Wildlife Management Area Action Plan. All these plans call for increasing the amount of grassland in the state, and that's certainly a big part of this. We're talking about working in grassland bird complexes. We're trying to make corridors and complexes. So we're not just buying postage stamps out in the middle of nowhere. We're trying to connect property and get that resilience back so that we can have a more productive ecosystem out there.
Any follow-up, Commissioner, or anyone else?
Well, maybe I'll just add, because I think I would agree with everything that Aaron just said. And I think one other thing, too, that we're trying to emphasize in the pheasant plan is that connection to people and that outreach. And how do we use some of these places as a way to make sure that people are maintaining those connections to our outdoor heritage and our hunting heritage. And so some of those opportunities we have that are close to population centers, too. And we have some really good examples of those. I'm not talking just Twin Cities Metro, but we have population centers all over the state. And a number in Pheasant Range, and that's an important strategic priority as well.
A little over a year ago, we had a couple parcels of land. We had some willing sellers in Lac-La-Parle County wanted to sell some land to the DNR. But the county commissioners out there, I believe, voted 4-1 against that. The DNR had the option of taking this before the Land Exchange Board, where I think most of us think they had a pretty good shot at probably getting a favorable ruling. The DNR decided not to do that. Can you explain to the crowd why the DNR didn't do that, and what do you think are the next steps going forward?
So I first want to just take one step back, because over the last number of years, the DNR has really focused on a strategic land asset management approach. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, to make sure that we are acquiring the best possible parcels that are best meeting the mission of the department for the public. And the second piece is to make sure we're doing exactly what our county commissioner friend here talks about, is making sure that the local townships and the counties are in the loop on what we're doing. And clearly we have some work yet to do with Lac qui Parle County. I mean, that's obvious. The vote is an example of that. The reason we chose not to take it to the Land Exchange Board really is a choice and approach. And I want to be really clear. It's not a choice of do something and do nothing. It's a choice of take it to the Land Exchange Board or try a different strategy. And what we decided to do was try that other strategy. The concern with taking it to the Land Exchange Board is, I don't disagree with you. We might have had a good likelihood of winning in that kind of fight, but it's one of those cases where you may win the battle and lose the war. Public lands and habitat is a long-term, issue. We are in this for the long haul. We need to be able to acquire more than just one parcel and think about it beyond just one parcel. So what we are trying to do is to sit down with the county board, some of the members who have those concerns, to better understand what their concerns are and to see if we can find a path that addresses their concerns and our needs in Lac qui Parle County. And so we're working through that process. That takes time to have those conversations and reestablish a relationship. So, what I will say is if this doesn't work, next time we may try a different strategy. This isn't precedent setting, but I think it really is important to recognize that our public lands are for the long term, and so our strategy is going to be for the long term.
I was just going to ask, does the county commissioner have anything to say about that perspective?
Well, and I think it's important. Lac qui Parle County isn't up here, so they can't speak. But from the county's perspective, we work with DNR on so many different things that are beyond just this. And so I appreciate the fact that DNR is willing to try a different approach, try to address different areas without burning bridges. Because the reality from my experiences is we really hear from constituents and neighbors if they have concerns, and it's the county board's responsibility to act on behalf of that local entity. And so, yes, it may not fit right now. It's not something that I can say will or will not work in the future, but it's important to not burn bridges and continue to have healthy working relationships going forward.
Public lands exist in Minnesota across a large swath of the state that doesn't have any pheasants. I know you've hunted multiple species. Can you talk a little bit about how those public lands, non-pheasant country, has played a role in you becoming a hunter and conservationist?
Well, I grew up on a farm in the Red River Valley, which is mainly farmland, and so we didn't have 1,000 acres of personal property to go hunt animals on, and so it was imperative that we had the opportunity to use public lands to kind of spur that fire and desire to become lifelong hunters. And it is interesting with the work of Tony Nelson's here, our local Pheasants Forever rep. The population has rebounded based on what those acquisitions are. You now see pheasants in areas of Clay County that weren't there, and it does go to say that if you build the habitat, eventually something will come. And so I think that in order to reach a new demographic of hunters that may live in the cities or may live in the farms, I think it's important that we continue to help facilitate public lands so that people can hunt on them.
R3 has been a big topic. Our public lands and public land access, is that mandatory to mitigate some of the losses we're seeing of hunters and conservationists? Again, Howard Vincent talked a lot about that at the Life member breakfast this morning. And if we're going to talk about R3, recruitment, reactivation, and help me, what's the third R? Okay, thank you. Are public lands a key component to R3 efforts?
Absolutely. I think, and I've worked a lot on kind of R3 and also a broader sense with the No Child Left Inside legislation. And, as a Native person and a younger woman, there aren't enough of people who look like me who are hunting. And I think that that's true of a lot of different populations in our state. And so I think it's one thing to get people comfortable being outside. It's another thing to get them comfortable with the, hunting regulations and knowing how to use a gun properly. And then if you add on top of that now we taught you how to do this, but now there's no place for you to go. The reality is that not every Minnesotan is going to own private land or enough acres of private land where they would be able to just hunt on their own land. And so I think if we're serious about it, and I think especially when we look at the newer populations who are getting into hunting, they're using public land. It's the younger folks, the backcountry hunters and anglers, those groups, and the mentoring that's going on is happening on our public land. So I think without that access, we would have a significant barrier to getting new people outside and doing those activities.
Scott has been working with landowners on fee title and easements for years. Tell us a little bit about the attitude you encounter from quote-unquote willing sellers. Talk about dealing with landowners a little bit. What attitude do you experience in rural Minnesota toward land purchases? And I first met you, I think, on the prairies of South Dakota, and at the time we talked about how it was different in South Dakota from North Dakota, and so maybe speak to that too. How are some of the attitudes different from those three states?
Well, I'd like to start with saying there's always lots of folks out there that want to sell land as public land. Sarah mentioned that they have a way to strategically pick the best of the best. We do too. I would say of the folks that contact us, maybe ultimately we move forward on maybe 5% of those. The vast majority of those we turn down right away because it doesn't meet whatever guidelines we've established. So that's kind of something that's out there that people think we're trying to grab everything, and that's absolutely not true. The reasons that people want to sell land vary when the agricultural economy is down. It's not unusual for me to get a call from an egg producer that says, I need some operating cash next spring. This land here is really poor land. I'm tired of trying to farm it. Are you interested in buying it so I can get some operating capital? Most of the people that we buy land from have some kind of conservation or public land purpose in why they want to sell the land to us. So how the attitudes vary, it really depends on the individual or the group that you might be working with. I've spent most of my career in an agriculturally dominated rural landscapes. So I can tell you that, that individual landowner obviously is very interested in selling their land, but the neighbor may not be. Or, if you're talking to the local garden club or the local wildlife club or the local county commissioners, you have different views on land acquisition because they have different interests. So I think what's important in those cases is that we send our message correctly for the right group that we're talking to at the time. As far as the differences between us and the Dakotas, I haven't worked in the Dakotas for a long time, so I'm a little hesitant in saying, but it kind of depends on the group you're working with. If it's an agriculturally dominated group you're working with, the attitude's probably pretty similar from state to state. So I don't know if there's big differences there, but I really shouldn't speak too much to that.
All right, so you want to jump in? Just to add on to there, Pheasants Forever protects a lot of land in Minnesota, and one of the favorite parts of my job is working with landowners, and oftentimes they have such cool stories about the connection their family has to the land. I can think of several examples of century farms. They've been in the family forever, and the decision has now, or they've been forced to make the decision that they're selling the property, and they want to protect the property forever. And I'm going to throw out a quick number, $10 million. In the last 10 years, Pheasants Forever has received $10 million in land value donations. So we don't pay over appraised value, but we often don't pay appraised value. And so anytime a landowner sells below appraised value, that difference is considered a land value donation. So we've been able to stretch state funding, federal funding, partner funding, and essentially protect $10 million worth of land more because of landowners that have worked with Pheasants Forever for protection of public land.
I think, and I think of the projects and all of it's not just Pheasants Forever, it's Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, Public Land Trust, all these different groups that come to the Outdoor Heritage Council. They, even with the amount of money that we're putting into those projects, they all have backlogs of projects that they, of willing sellers that they could be acting on if they wanted to. And I think, and this relates to the Lac-La-Parle issue as well, is it really is, it's an interesting value judgment that's happening because we don't see folks, if it was XYZ business being put in on that land, people are like, oh, great business, kind of regardless of what it is. Yet when it's public land, now all of a sudden people are wanting to, tap the brakes on it. And so I think that that's just an interesting sort of value issue that we see. And I think, especially between those of us who actually spend a lot of time outside and use those public lands and have seen it in action. So I think that's something we deal with a lot with pushback we get on all these issues in the legislature.
Jenny, you live in Clay County. You live with these issues much closer than a lot of us. What do you consider the single biggest obstacle or challenge to creating more public lands in Minnesota, especially a place like Clay County?
Honestly, it's communication. In terms of planning and zoning issues or acquisition issues, whenever I observe public pushback the most, it's because they haven't been brought into the loop. So if you have a landowner in rural Clay County who, like Aaron said, it's been in the family for a long, long time, and they want to preserve it for generations going forward, if their neighbor thinks that eventually they'll have the opportunity to purchase that, and then they hear that Pheasants Forever is working with them, there's a concern there, and then that kind of ripples going forward. So the best thing that can happen is to make sure that, like I said earlier, we're notifying those township officials. They're having discussions with their neighbors. Everyone's allowed to have that buy-in going forward. And so when, like I said, if you skip that step, that's when you'll have 100 people at a public hearing with major concerns. As opposed to if we're able to inform them going forward, there may be issues about the access or weed control or whatever going forward, but at least they've had an opportunity to weigh in.
I'd just like to build on that, but from the flip side, I mean, I really appreciate your answer on that. I think, the other side of challenge is opportunity, and I don't want to let this pass without the moment to say, I think really one of the benefits too of the Legacy Amendment has been enhancing the coordination between partners who work on public lands issues and public lands acquisition. And I think that one of the opportunities is that we have kind of a modular approach for landowners that may want to approach a public land sale in different ways. So some people want to work with the DNR. We have wonderful folks all across the state who have great local relationships. Some people don't want to work with a state agency, and so we have partners like Pheasants Forever and local chapters. We have sportsmen's clubs and conservation clubs sometimes that get involved in this work too and can work neighbor to neighbor. So I think there's that huge opportunity to bring together those partnerships, and the multiple benefits piece that we talked about I think is another huge opportunity. And I just want to highlight the Worthington Wells WMA project, which was a project done a few years ago with a number of partners. The city of Worthington, Pheasants Forever, the DNR was involved, but that allowed the city of Worthington to protect its wellhead area. So we've got that clean water benefit, and created a place close to the city of Worthington for folks to get out and hunt on a wildlife management area. And so I think looking for those kinds of opportunities is really something that the Legacy Amendment and these partnerships has opened up.
So I think it goes beyond hunting too. Clay County has, because of our issues with flooding, has had a lot of properties that we've had to buy out to get houses out of the floodplain. And so part of the criticism that our county board has is, okay, you have all of these lands, you can't disperse them because of the bonding bills that paid for these lands. What are you going to do with them? So also, the public has heartburn if they see these lands not being used. And so we were able to partner with Pheasants Forever and add about 7 acres of pollinator habitat into that land. So now that once it's established, we'll be able to work with partners like Extension, the local colleges to do some bee counts on that. And so as long as the public is seeing that these lands are being used wisely, they support that.
Some people have been asking about the Gary Clancy Wildlife Management Area. We're talking about building WMAs. Gary was a longtime writer for Outdoor News. A lot of people, I think, enjoyed his columns over the years. He died in 2016, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We're sad we lost him before his time. As soon as we found out about Gary, Pheasants Forever, Outdoor News, some other folks said, we've got to create a WMA in this guy's name. And it's on track. We've got the parcel. It is southeast of Mankato, Aaron, about 10, 15 miles, almost 170 acres, I believe?
15 minutes, yep.
Yeah. And we're going to have the dedication this summer is the plan. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's some good news, and we'll keep you posted in Outdoor News about that. I'm hoping to get a real nice crowd at the dedication. what is your favorite public land parcel in Minnesota? And how about I start with Scott down at the end and we'll work our way back.
I thought about this, and it's really hard. I have some that my son's in the crowd. There's one that he did his Eagle Scout project on, that his Boy Scouts troop spent hundreds of hours doing invasive species management on, collecting native plant seeds, doing those kind of things. I have another one that the ashes of my last dog is on, and it's where my son shot his first rooster over that dog in Minnesota. So I got to pick one. I'm going to pick Miller Hills in northern Candioi County. It's got some beautiful native prairie on it. They don't make that stuff no more, folks, and we can't recreate that. So the little bit that's left, it's nice to know that some of it is protected forever, and that's the one where my dog's ashes and Matt's first Minnesota rooster came from.
I'm going to quickly pick two. Both coincidentally are in Wright County, which is where I happen to live. But the first one, Minnesota Veterans WMA. This was a 604-acre parcel in Wright County that the landowner, Century Farm landowners, took immaculate care of this property. Beautiful prairie, beautiful wetlands, old growth oak, Clearwater River running through the property, and it's just an amazing parcel. It's an hour and a half from here, so if you have not been there, make sure you're there. I see Fred Bankston in the crowd here. He's the long-term manager of this property now as the area wildlife manager, doing a great job. But and one of the cool things, going back to Gary Clancy, we were able to recognize our Minnesota veterans in name on this property and give them a shout out for all these freedoms that we have. So that was really cool and meaningful to me. Moving just a little bit west to Erpelding Generations WPA, and I lied, that was not in Wright County, it's in Stearns County right across the border, but another Century Farm and an avid birder. This gentleman had documented 181 species of birds on this property over the years that this was in his family, and he had kept a list. He handed it right to me, and it was cool. Snow geese, all kinds of different things. But again, just able to protect a beautiful piece of property, some wetlands, some restored prairie, and those things are there for everybody and for future generations well beyond us.
And I might add, he's up to 187 birds on that track. He continues to go back to it often. I hear from him quite often. Aaron and I work together on this one. And he attributes the new species because of the habitat improvement that we've made on there.
I think you're starting to hear why public lands are so great, because everyone has its own story and its own group of people that have special memories on them. And so I think public lands are really integral to Minnesotans creating memories. My favorite parcel of public land, honestly, I'd probably say whichever one I visited last is my new favorite. I feel like I have that experience all the time. But I will say the Paul Bunyan State Forest, and that is because the tie to my own experiences and memories with my family. That is where we deer hunt, that is where we grouse hunt, and it's an amazing place because you go the first weekend of deer season and it is packed with people, and there's kind of this energy, and you learn to know people's trucks and everything, and you're like, yep, they're back this year. You don't know their names, but you know their vehicles. And yet you can still find very quiet corners in it too. So it's a very amazing place.
My favorite piece of public land is also north. I grew up in the Cass Lake area, so 4 hours north of here. I don't even think it has a name, but there's some state land in Pennington area where I learned to deer hunt. That's where we parked at 4:30 in the morning to trek into the deer stand through a swamp, and walked over a beaver dam there, and had a lot of really, really good memories with my family there. And not that everyone should go find it. You don't want to put too much pressure on there, but then I also want to give a shout out to, I live in the suburbs now. I live in Roseville, and we have a really amazing park system, and a lot of access to there are little pockets of feeling like you're not in the city that do exist in our urban and suburban areas that I think are incredibly valuable. And so I'm glad that I have those available to me. I always think that no day is made worse by going for a walk in the woods. And so it's nice to have that available kind of throughout our state.
So if this was an angling convention, I don't think any panelists would answer where their favorite spot to get fish would be. Everyone would say Lake Notelli. So I'm kind of impressed that we're all sharing this. So I have a couple places. One, there's a walk-in land east of Barnesville that I hunted with my husband when we were first married and our son was really young. And so that's kind of a pheasant fun spot for us. We like going. But also my dad is here. So I'm going to say public waters. There's a lake in northern Clay County that we used to waterfall hunt, and my grandpa dropped 3 teal with 1 shot. On the youth day, I got a canvas back there, so that's kind of a special spot for us.
I've got several questions here from the audience that we've got time, I'll offer them to the panel. Question here, please describe the DNR position on hard rock mining in the BWCA watershed. If we're talking within the watershed, I presume we're talking Twin Metals. Can you speak to that briefly? That's a public lands issue here in Minnesota.
It is, absolutely, and I appreciate the question because I think it's important for folks to understand what the DNR's role is with respect to the Twin Metals project. Obviously we're aware the Boundary Waters is a very special place in Minnesota, but I think it's also important to understand we do have a proposal from Twin Metals now in our office. And so our role as a regulator in that project is not to be a project proponent or a project opponent and to have an opinion on it. It is to ensure that our regulatory process is objective, is neutral, is transparent. And so that is what we are going to do as we move through that process.
And I would add to that too, whether it's this project or other projects that impact our water in our state. It is the agency's role or the PUC's role or any of these regulatory bodies, it's their role to enforce the laws. And so if we want stronger protections for things like the boundary waters, then we need you folks to elect more people who will be invested in changing the laws so that the rules are such that we can make sure that our values are reflected in what can be protected through the law. Because I think that's an important piece of it where, they're restrained by what the statutes are, and it's our role as legislators to change that if that doesn't reflect what the public wants, in 2020.
And I'm just going to add one more thing because I should have said, certainly as we go through this, we also want to hear from the public in terms of what are the issues that we need to look at in that neutral, transparent, rigorous process. And so, the first step to the environmental impact statement process is scoping. And so we certainly do want to hear from people in terms of those issues that they think we need to take a look at in those processes.
The new pheasant management plan puts emphasis on acquisition near towns of population 15,000 to 20,000 residents. Very few rural communities have that population. Why the focus on just big towns like Rochester, Mankato, and St. Cloud?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Aaron's certainly welcome to pipe up. I think this goes to what I was talking about before. We certainly, part of the goal and part of the emphasis of the pheasant action plan is on those habitat complexes. And so we certainly want to add and acquire land where we're building those complexes. But another important piece of that is that connection to people and that access issue. And so by adding parcels that are close to those population centers, it also ensures we can fulfill that second goal of getting people out into those areas and making sure, as Representative Becker-Finn said earlier, as we're recruiting people into these activities, that they have a place to go that is close to home.
Yeah, Sarah said it pretty well. I would just say it's not replacing anything. It's just providing additional emphasis on creating that access close to home. But we're certainly going to be targeting strategic areas all across the state in the right places.
We've got a question here. How will the money earmarked for acquisition in the bonding bill be allocated? We talked about $30 million earlier during the panel. Will the state have representatives at land auctions, or will they buy from PF or Ducks Unlimited? Can someone speak to how that process unfolds?
Yeah, we use a number of different pots to acquire land. So bonding dollars when we have those, outdoor heritage dollars when we have those. From time to time, we have Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund dollars. We have Reinvest in Minnesota dollars. We have partner dollars. And so, the thing I will say is acquisition has not gotten less complicated in terms of the funding mix. It really takes all of those funding mixes. And so sometimes, though, different sources of money have different restrictions on them, and so we can pool those together or place them to the right parcels. So I can't say at this time specifically which parcels are targeted for that pot of $17 million. We have to get through the legislature before we even have that pot of money. So, it may be parcels that the DNR acquires directly. It may be parcels that we work with Pheasants Forever, another partner, on.
And I would add, I mean, there will be pushback about this specific piece in the governor's proposal, because we do have folks who, one of the platforms of their focus in the legislature is being anti-public land. So, it's going to be an uphill climb, but I think it's important that we do draw attention to it, because I think we're going to hear from more Minnesotans who want us to be doing that than we're going to hear from folks who don't want us to be investing the money in that way.
Are there any closing thoughts from the panel, or if there's any other questions from the audience, let us know now. And again, any closing thoughts on public land? Scott?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment. You all can make a difference. Now, most of you that are probably sitting here right now are those that are out there actively doing it, but I like to share this with the public I work with. I talk to state legislators. I talk to, if they hear from 5 people on an issue, that's a big deal. So if you think it takes a lot to maybe get something done, you might be wrong. I would encourage you to go out there and let those folks, your elected officials, if you're in a township, your township board, if you're in a county, the county board, your state legislator, talk to them about it, because I believe it can really make a difference. So.
I can't agree with Scott more. That is tremendously important. I'm going to use my quick closing statements just for a quick plug. We talked about the Build a Wildlife area with Gary Clancy and the Minnesota Veterans, and we're raising money right now for the next Build a Wildlife area. And you can do it right on the other side of Rob there at the Minnesota PF booth. A lot of exhibitors, you probably have seen that here, are donating a percentage of their sales this weekend to this Build a Wildlife area. And Pheasants Forever and partners have agreed to make every donation matched by $10 more in an effort to go and find the next Build a Wildlife area in Minnesota. So something you care about and you want to be part of this effort, go see Sabin and Becca over there at the Minnesota booth in 413.
I'll just say I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some dedicated time talking about public lands, because they are so important to our state and important to Minnesotans. That's clear as I've traveled around this past year and had a lot of conversations with folks. And I think the connections to communities, local communities, is important. Sometimes that presents a struggle. But I just will also say that we have a lot of great information on the DNR website if people want to know more about the public lands that are near to them. We have a lot of great resources. We also just have a lot of great tools. If you want to take the advice from my friends here to my left and go talk with your legislators or others, we have a lot of information just on public lands, some facts, some statistics, because public lands, while they're managed by DNR, they're owned by you. And so thank you very much for making our public lands what they are in Minnesota.
And I'll just say, I can't speak for everyone on the Outdoor Heritage Council, but we rarely hear from the actual citizens and members of the public. Those are public meetings. I've been working hard since I was appointed to the council last year to make sure the meetings are recorded and video recorded and live streamed, and that there's a way for more people to be informed and be able to share their input. So I just encourage folks to check that out. We have a pretty good website. If you Google Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, the more involvement we have from the public, the better we can be and the better we can make those choices about how we spend those dollars.
I'll just echo that too. Have a cup of coffee with your local representatives. Let them know what your concerns are. I can't advocate for what I don't know about. And so have those conversations. It does make a big difference. From the counties don't have a Parks and Rec budget. My county doesn't anyhow. And so to have great public hunting, come visit Clay County. They've got good public hunting. But that's how we're able to get that done.